She was 54 years old and she had 2,847s in a checking account that had once held their entire future. No house she could go back to. No job after her husband had talked her out of renewing her nursing license 8 years ago because he needed her home, because the kids needed her home, because the practice needed her home. And she had believed him, the way you believe a man you've shared a bed with for 26 years. The divorce had been final on a Wednesday morning in March, and her attorney, a kind woman with tired eyes, had told her afterward that the settlement was as fair as it was going to get. Half the value of a car she didn't know how to pay insurance on alone. A third of a retirement account that was mostly his. The house in Knoxville was his too, technically. The deed had been in his name since before they married, a detail she had never thought to question until the moment it mattered most. She drove out of the parking lot of the Knoxville courthouse house with the windows down even though it was raining. Because she needed to feel something that wasn't paperwork. And it was somewhere on I-40 heading east, with the Smoky Mountains beginning to rise up dark and green through the rain, that she remembered her Aunt Cecile's property in Harlan County. Vivienne Owens had not been back to Calder Bend, Kentucky in 19 years. She had last come for her aunt's funeral in 2005, stood at the grave in the church cemetery on a September afternoon, and told herself she would come back to sort through the property, and then she had gone home to Knoxville and never sorted anything. For 19 years she had paid the property taxes on Cecile's house by automatic bank transfer, and let a neighbor named Delbert check on the place twice a year. She had been meaning to deal with it. Life had not let her. Now life had let her. Life had, in fact, insisted. She drove 4 hours through the rain. She passed through small towns with dollar stores and Baptist churches and gas stations, selling boiled peanuts in paper cups. She crossed into Kentucky, and the mountains got greener and older looking. The kind of old that feels like it predates American history entirely. Like those ridges have been sitting there since before there was a word for ridges. She turned off the state highway onto a 2-lane road, and then off that onto a gravel road, and then up a long dirt driveway through a stand of white oak and sycamore, and there was Cecile's house. It was smaller than she remembered. White clapboard, tin roof, a front porch that sagged on the left side. The window boxes still had the shapes of dried flower stalks in them from God knows what year. Delbert had kept the roof from falling in as promised. The inside smelled the way houses smell, when they've been breathing quietly to themselves for a long time. Cecile's furniture was still there, covered with bed sheets. Vivienne pulled the sheets off, her aunt's yellow kitchen chairs, the old upright radio that hadn't worked since the 90s, a needlepoint sampler above the fireplace that said "Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly," words Vivienne had read 10,000 times as a child sitting in this room. She sat down in her aunt's wingback chair by the fireplace. She did not call her children. She did not call anyone. She just sat there while the rain came down on the tin roof, which is a particular sound that people who have heard it as children never entirely forget. Before we go any further, if this kind of story means something to you, we'd love for you to hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. These stories travel further than we ever expect, and we're grateful for every one of you who travels along. Vivienne Ann Owens had been born in Louisville in 1970, the second daughter of a machinist and a church organist. Her family had moved to Calder Bend when she was 7, following her father's job to a plant outside Harlan, and she had grown up in that mountain county the way children grow up in small places, knowing everyone's name, knowing their business, knowing the whole complicated web of who owed what to whom and who had forgiven it and who hadn't. She had been a practical girl who read voraciously and got good grades, and decided early that she wanted to be a nurse, because her mother's youngest sister had died of a burst appendix at 31, for no reason except that nobody caught it in time, and Vivienne had decided, at age 12, that catching things in time was a worthwhile life project. She had gone to nursing school at Eastern Kentucky University. She had met Dennis Owens in her 3rd year at a cookout at a friend's apartment. He was charming in the way of men who have never had to work very hard at being liked. Easy smile, good stories, always just interested enough in you to make you feel seen. He was in his 2nd year of medical school. She had married him at 24 and moved to Knoxville when he matched at UT for his residency. And she had told herself that this was the beginning, not the end, of the life she had planned. She had worked as a floor nurse at UT Medical Center for 6 years while Dennis built his practice. Then their daughter was born, and their son 2 years after, and Dennis had made the argument, quietly and repeatedly, that it was better for everyone if she was home. She had let her license lapse in 2016. She told herself she would renew it. She did not renew it. There were years in there that were not bad years, exactly. There were good Christmases and family vacations to the Gulf Coast, and evenings on the back porch with a glass of wine when she had thought, "This is a life, this is a real life," and meant it. But there was also something she had been not looking. For a long time, the way you don't look directly at a stain on the ceiling because looking at it means calling someone about it. And calling someone means admitting the roof is leaking, and you are not ready to admit the roof is leaking. Dennis had been not quite present for years. Then, she found out why. Her daughter Paige was the one who told her. Paige was 24, and had driven down from Cincinnati to take her mother to lunch, which was unusual enough that Vivienne had known, before they sat down, that something was coming. Paige had sat across from her at the restaurant and folded her hands on the table the way she did when she was preparing herself for something difficult, a habit she had had since she was 9 years old, and she said, "Mom, I need to tell you something that I've known for almost a year, and I'm sorry I waited this long." Vivienne had driven home from that lunch and gone straight to the bedroom and pulled Dennis's second cell phone out of the inside pocket of the blazer. He kept in the back of the closet, the one he wore when he said he was at the hospital for late rounds. She had not known until that moment that she had always known it was there. She filed the papers the following week. That was March. And now it was March again, 1 year later, sitting in the rain in Cecile's house with 2,847s in her checking account, and no nursing license and no plan. The money was not going to last. She knew that with the clarity that comes from having no other option but clarity. Cecile's house had no mortgage, so she had a roof, but she had no income. The county hospital in Harlan was hiring nurses but not lapsed nurses. And Releckenshire, she had already looked into it, would take months of coursework and supervised hours she couldn't afford to pay for right now. She applied for 3 jobs in her first week in Calder Bend. Administrative work at the county health department, bookkeeping at a construction company, receptionist at a dental office. She got 1 call back. The dental office hired someone who already lived in town. She started walking in the mornings because it was free and because it kept her from sitting in the house doing math. That always came out the same bad answer. One morning in early April, she walked farther than she had before, up the gravel road past the Calder Bend Church of Christ, and over the ridge on the far side of the hollow. She was following a deer trail through the hickory and tulip poplar when she came out into a clearing she did not remember from her childhood, and found herself standing in front of a building she had completely forgotten existed. It was a small stone building, not wood, which was unusual for the area. Limestone with a low slate roof, several slates missing and the gaps patched with tar paper and tin sheeting. 2 windows on the south wall, both intact. A wooden door warped in its frame. Beside the door, hanging from a single nail, was a painted wooden sign that had once been green. Most of the paint had peeled away, but Vivienne stepped close and could still make out the raised lettering beneath. Calder Bend Women's Cooperative, Est, 1931. She stood there for a long time. The April wind moved through the tulip poplar overhead. Something she could not name moved through her. She went to the county records office in Harlan the following Monday. The clerk, an older man named Orrin, who wore reading glasses on a chain, and moved through county records with the unhurried competence of someone who has been doing this for decades, pulled up the property history. The cooperative building had been owned and operated by the Calder Bend Women's Cooperative from 1931 until 1968, when the organization had dissolved following the death of its last active member. The property had transferred to the county and had sat in the records as abandoned for 56 years. It had been listed for sale 4 times. Nobody had bought it. Currently listed at $250. Vivienne looked at him. $250? Orrin looked back at her. The roof's got 3 bad sections and the county's been meaning to condemn it. What do you want with it? She wrote a check. She did not answer his question because she did not yet know the answer. She got the key from Orrin's office, a heavy iron skeleton key that left a faint rust line across her palm when she gripped it, and she drove back up to the hollow and she unlocked the door. It took some persuading. The lock had been waiting a long time, but it finally gave and the door swung inward on its iron hinges. Inside, the air was cold and still, and smelled of stone and old wood and something she couldn't identify, dry and sweet and faintly herbal. The light came in through the two south windows and lay in long rectangles on the stone floor. Against the far wall was a long wooden work table, its surface dark with decades of use. On the opposite wall hung 3 rows of empty wooden shelves, still solid. In the corner by the cold fireplace was a single oak chair, and beside it, bolted to the stone wall, an iron ring from which something had once hung. In the center of the room stood a spinning wheel. It was intact. The wood had dried and darkened, but the wheel turned when she touched it. Slightly, not freely, but it turned. Vivienne stood in the middle of that room for a long time. Then she sat down in the oak chair. Then she cried, and the crying surprised her because it was not the crying she had been doing since March. The exhausted, angry. How did I let this happen crying? It was something different. It felt like releasing pressure she hadn't known she was holding. If you're still with us, hit that subscribe button now, because what she found next is the part we can't stop thinking about. The following day she came back with a broom and a bucket, and a pair of work gloves she'd found in Cecile's barn. She started with the stone floor, sweeping 56 years of leaf debris and dust, and the papery remains of nesting mice toward the door. She was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the grout lines with an old toothbrush when she noticed that the stone in the far left corner of the room was different. Not different in color, exactly, but different in texture. The other stones had been worn smooth by decades of foot traffic. This stone was rough. It had not been walked on. She pried at its edges with a flathead screwdriver. It lifted. Beneath it was a cavity, not large, maybe 12 inches square, lined with old cedar planks that had kept the contents dry for who knows how long. Inside the cavity was a tin box sealed with wax along its lid seam. She lifted the box out. She sat down on the floor. She broke the wax seal and opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in a piece of oilcloth, were 2 things: a small ledger book with a red cloth cover worn at the corners, and a folded letter handwritten on 2 sheets of cream paper, the ink faded but still legible. She opened the letter first. To whoever finds this, it began. My name is Octavia Garland Price. I am the founding secretary of the Calder Bend Women's Cooperative, and I am writing this on March 14, 1968, which I believe will be one of our last days in this building. Agnes Falk passed in January. Louise Beaumont passed in February. I am 71 years old and my hands are not what they were. I do not know who will come here after us or when, but I know someone will, because things that matter have a way of being found. What we did here was this. From 1931 until today, the women of this cooperative wove and quilted and taught every woman in this county who wanted to learn. We kept no records of the teaching because there was nothing to record but the names of women who came and stayed, and left knowing something they hadn't known before. But I kept one record, the one in the ledger. I kept it because I wanted some to know. I want you to know. Vivienne set the letter down and opened the ledger. The first page, dated September 1931, had a heading written in a careful, upright script. Materials purchased for women who could not purchase their own. Below it, in narrow columns, were dates, names, and entries. October 3, 1931, pearl combs, wool thread and cotton batting for first quilt. November 4, 1931, Ida Huff, loom shuttle and heddle rod, $20. December 1, 1931, Mavis Sizemore, winter dress fabric, 4 yards, a 64. She has 4 children. Her husband is in the mine. The entries continued page after page, year after year. Through the Depression, when the amounts got smaller because the dollar went further, but also because there was less to spend. Through the war years, when materials were scarce and the entries noted improvisation. Repurposed flour sacks, no cost. Unraveled old sweater, respun. Vivienne read until the light through the south windows went gold and then orange and then gray. She went home to Cecile's house. She could not sleep. She lay in her aunt's bedroom and thought about Octavia Garland Price, who had been born sometime around 1897, who had opened a cooperative in a stone building in Kentucky, hollow in the middle of the Great Depression, who had spent 37 years quietly purchasing wool and cotton batting and dress fabric for women who couldn't buy their own, who had sealed the record of it in a tin box under a stone floor so that someone, someday, would know. The thing that kept Vivienne awake was not the ledger itself. It was a specific entry she had read near the middle of the book, dated June 1944. Nursing supplies for Delia Marsh. Bandages, carbolic, needle and thread. For 95, she is treating the miners when they won't go to the doctor. She learned it here. A woman named Delia Marsh had learned wound care in this cooperative, and she had used it to treat men who came home from the mines with lacerations and crush injuries. and couldn't afford a doctor's visit, or couldn't admit they needed one. She had been practicing informal nursing in this hollow for years, and she had learned the foundations of it in this building, at this work table, taught by the women of this cooperative. Vivienne thought about her 12-year-old self deciding to be a nurse, because catching things in time was a worthwhile life project. She thought about the 23 years she had spent as someone's wife, deferring and nodding and letting her license lapse. She thought about Delia Marsh treating minors with $1.95 worth of supplies, because someone had taken the time to teach her. She went back to the ledger the next morning and spent the whole day with it. She read every page. She began to see the names repeating across decades. Not the same women, but the same families. A Combs in 1931 and a Combs in 1958. A Huff in 1935 and a Huff in 1961. The cooperative had been teaching the daughters of the women it had taught, generation after generation, in the same stone building at the same long work table. She read the final page of the ledger. April 2, 1968. Last entry. I am closing the book. Whatever we have planted here is already growing. I trust that. Signed, O.G. Price. Vivienne closed the ledger and held it in her lap for a while. Then she went back and read the letter again, the part she had glossed over the first time. Near the bottom of the second page, Octavia had written, I had a name in mind for whoever found this. I don't know your name, but I know you came here for a reason, and I know you are wondering if you are the right person for what comes next. You are people who wonder that always are. Something in Vivienne's chest went quiet for the first time in a year. She stayed in Calder Bend that spring. She hired a local man named Pete Burkett, whose grandmother, as it turned out, had been a member of the cooperative in the 1950s, to help her repoint the mortar between the limestone blocks and replace the 3 bad sections of roof. She paid him from her dwindling savings. He charged her less than half his usual rate. My grandmother used to talk about this place, Pete said, one afternoon mixing mortar. She said Octavia Price taught her to read a sewing pattern and that it was the first time in her life she felt like she could understand instructions, like she could learn things. He said this simply, without sentimentality. He went back to mixing mortar. Vivienne went back to sweeping stone, and thought about what it meant to teach someone that they were capable of learning. While Pete and his son worked on the building, Vivienne drove down to the county library and spent 3 mornings in the local history collection. She found a small mention of the cooperative in the Harlan Daily Enterprise from September 1932. The Calder Bend Women's Cooperative held its first public exhibition of quilts and woven goods, Saturday at the Calder Bend Church of Christ Hall. Approximately 40 women attended. Mrs. Octavia Price, cooperative secretary, stated that the organization's purpose is to ensure that no woman in this county lacks the skills to clothe and provide for her family. She found a photograph. It had run beside the 1932 article. A group of women standing in front of the stone building, some holding quilts, some holding baskets of yarn. In the center, a tall woman in a dark dress with her hair pulled back severely, not smiling exactly, but with the expression of someone who has something important to say and intends to say it. Below the photograph, a caption, Mrs. Octavia Garland Price Center, with members of the Calder Bend Women's Cooperative. Vivienne had the photograph photocopied. She had it enlarged. She brought it back to the cooperative building and hung it on the wall above the long work table. She stood back and looked at Octavia Price's expression in the photograph and said aloud, to the empty room, I found the ledger. I read all of it. I'm going to try. That was when Harlan Greer showed up. He drove a silver Chevy Silverado, which in Harlan County is unremarkable, but his suit was not Harlan County. He was 55 years old, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who had played college football 20 years ago and still moved like it. He had a firm handshake and a business card that said Greer Land Holdings, Lexington, KY. He said he'd been trying to reach her by phone. She had been getting poor signal up in the hollow, and he hoped she didn't mind the drive-up. He got right to it. His company was developing a resort and outdoor recreation complex in the ridge country above Calder Bend. They had already acquired the 3 properties adjacent to hers. Her parcel, 11 acres, the cooperative building, and the timber rights, was the final piece. He was authorized to offer her a $160,000, cash with a 30-day close. Vivienne did not say anything for almost half a minute. She thought about the $2,200 left in her checking account. She thought about being 54 years old, with no nursing license and no income, and a 19-year-old stone building with 3 new roof sections and freshly pointed mortar. She thought about what $160,000 would mean. She could go somewhere, pay for relecture, start again. She could breathe. Then she thought about Octavia Price's letter. People who wonder that always are. She thought about Delia Marsh and the 195 thence of nursing supplies. She thought about Pete Burkett's grandmother learning to read a sewing pattern and feeling for the first time that she could understand instructions. "Mr. Greer," she said, "do you know anything about this building?" He looked at it. Newly pointed limestone, new slate on the roof, the old green door recently planed and rehung. "I know it was some kind of community center. Listen, I respect the history, but history doesn't have a mortgage, and you do." "I don't have a mortgage," Vivienne said. "I bought this building for $250, he recalibrated. "Then you're sitting on a 640 times return. That's an exceptional position for a first investment." "A woman named Octavia Garland Price ran a cooperative in this building for 37 years, Vivienne said. "She spent her own money teaching women in this county to sew and weave and provide for their families when there was nothing else. She kept a ledger. Every dollar is written down. There is a woman in that ledger who used what she learned here to give medical care to coal miners who couldn't afford a doctor. That is what happened in this building." Harlan Greer nodded with the patience of a man who has heard a lot of stories in the process of buying a lot of properties. "That's a remarkable history. I mean that. But I'm in the business of the future, not the past, and my offer is good for 7 days. He gave her the card. He shook her hand. He got in the Silverado and drove away down the gravel road. Vivienne stood in the clearing and listened to the engine sound fade into the hollow. Those 7 days were the longest of her year. She did not sleep well. She ran the numbers every night and they kept coming out the same way, which was that $160,000 was security, and security was not nothing when you were 54 and starting over. She tried to think about it practically, the way Dennis would have thought about it, and that comparison made her put the notepad down. On the 5th night, she opened the ledger again from the beginning and read it straight through. It took her until 2 in the morning. When she finished, she turned back to the last page. "Whatever we have planted here is already growing. I trust that." On the 6th day, she made a list. It was not a financial list. It was a different kind of list. She wrote down every woman she knew in Calder Bend and the surrounding hollows. Neighbors. Women she'd met at the church, at Delbert's farm stand, at the gas station outside town. Women she'd talked to for 5 minutes at the county health department waiting room. She wrote down what she knew about each one. She had spent enough years as a nurse to notice quickly what people were carrying. The woman at the health department waiting room who had mentioned in passing that she'd been trying to get her GED for 3 years, but the online program kept freezing her out. The young mother at the farm stand whose toddler had an ear infection she was treating with leftover antibiotics from another prescription because the copay had seemed too high. The woman at church who had asked Vivienne in a low voice if she knew anything about blood pressure readings, because her husband's machine said something alarming last week, and she wasn't sure what it meant. Vivienne looked at the list. She looked at the ledger. She thought about what Octavia Price had understood in 1931 that was still true now. That the most useful thing you can give someone who is struggling is not a handout but a skill, and not just any skill, a skill that changes what they believe they're capable of. She called Harlan Greer on the morning of the 7th day. "Mr. Greer," she said, "I've made my decision. I'm not selling. Not now, not for this offer. This building isn't mine to sell for a resort. It has a different purpose, and I think I'm the one supposed to carry it." There was a pause. "Mrs. Owens, with respect, you're declining a significant financial offer with no clear plan to generate income from the property." "I know," she said. "Then you understand what I'm telling you about the risk." "Yes," she said. "Thank you for the offer. Goodbye, Mr. Greer." She pressed end and stood in the cooperative building in the morning light coming through the south windows and thought, well, here we are. Here is what she did. She filed paperwork with the Kentucky Heritage Council to nominate the Calder Bend Women's Cooperative Building for the State Historic Register. A local archivist named Theo, 28 years old and visibly delighted by the ledger, volunteered to help assemble the application. It took 6 months. The building was approved. She applied with Theo's help to have Octavia Price's ledger and founding letter placed in the Special Collections Archive at the University of Kentucky Library. They accepted it, along with a photocopy. Vivienne kept the originals in the tin box, resealed, in the building's back room. She filed for nonprofit status under the name the Octavia Price Learning Cooperative. She used her last $600 to pay the filing fee. The first donation came from Pete Burkett, who returned the check she had paid him for the roof work and wrote in the memo line, "Grandma would want this." Then she started making calls. She had found, in her research at the library, a 1961 county directory that listed the names and addresses of cooperative members. She found 11 surviving family members, daughters and granddaughters of women who had learned to sew and weave and provide in this building during the Depression and the war, and the long, lean decades after. She wrote each of them a letter by hand, on cream paper, using Cecile's old fountain pen, because Octavia had written in a letter, and she felt the form was appropriate. She told them what she had found. She told them what she was building. She told them that if they had anything, a memory, a story, a piece of work their grandmother had made in this building, she would like to know about it. 8 of the 11 wrote back. A woman in Lexington, whose grandmother Mavis Sizemore was the third entry in the ledger. Winter dress fabric, 4 yards, $0.64. She has 4 children. Sent a photograph of the dress. Mavis Sizemore had made it in the cooperative in December 1931. The photograph showed Mavis at what appeared to be a Christmas gathering wearing the dress. She was smiling in the photograph, with the particularity of a smile that belongs to someone who made the thing they're wearing. A man in Cincinnati, whose mother had been a member in the 1950s, sent a hand-woven table runner, pale blue and cream, still folded in its original tissue paper. He said his mother had made it in this building, and had kept it in a cedar chest for 60 years, and had told him once that she had learned to weave in Calder Bend, and that it was the only skill she had ever acquired, that was purely hers. Vivienne hung the photograph of Mavis Sizemore on the wall beside Octavia Price's photograph. She laid the table runner on the long work table where it could be seen. Donations came in slowly and then less slowly. The surgeon whose mother had been in the cooperative in the late 40s. He had become a doctor in Louisville. He had been waiting. He said in his letter, for a reason to do something that felt like it meant something, sent a check for $8,000. He wrote, "My mother told me once that she learned in this building, that she had good hands, and that knowing that changed everything she did afterward. I am a surgeon because my mother had good hands. I am sending this because I never got to thank Octavia Price." In the first 5 months, the Octavia Price Learning Cooperative took in $41,000. Vivienne used the money to do what she had been working towards since the 6th night, when she made her list. She hired a licensed practical nurse from Harlan to come to the cooperative building every other Thursday evening and run free health literacy classes. How to read a blood pressure cuff, how to evaluate whether a child's fever needed a doctor visit, when a wound could be treated at home and when it couldn't. She started a GED study group on Tuesday mornings. She partnered with the county library's bookmobile to bring resources into the Hollow twice a month. She brought in a woman from Berea who still knew traditional Appalachian textile techniques to teach weaving and quilting on the original work table, because it seemed wrong not to, because that was how it had started. She also, in the mornings before the cooperative opened, studied. She had enrolled in a nurse relecture program, online at her own kitchen table in Cecile's house. It was difficult. She was 19 years out of practice, but she had always been good with her hands. Her supervisors at UT Medical had told her so, and that turned out not to be the kind of thing you entirely forget. She got her license back in February. She posted the news on a piece of paper in the cooperative window, not on social media, just on the window the way Octavia Price might have posted news, visible to whoever walked past. Within 2 days, 3 women in Calder Bend had knocked on the door to ask if she could take a look at something. She said yes to all 3. On a Saturday in May, a full year after she had first walked up the deer trail and found the building in the clearing. Vivienne held a gathering at the cooperative. She had invited everyone she could reach. She had expected 20 people and gotten, by her rough count, 63. They came from Calder Bend and from the surrounding hollows and from Harlan, and from as far away as Hazard and Barberville. The oldest person there was a woman named Iris Sizemore, 91 years old, the daughter of Mavis Sizemore, in the 1931 photograph, and she was pushed up the gravel path in a wheelchair by her granddaughter, and she walked through the door of the cooperative under her own power, reaching back for the wheelchair only when she got to the long work table and wanted to sit. Iris Sizemore put her hands flat on the work table. She kept them there for a moment. Then she said, in a voice that was surprisingly clear for 91. My mother sat at this table. Nobody said anything for a few seconds. Then someone in the back started to cry, which set off a general chain reaction that lasted several minutes and did not embarrass anyone present. They told stories. They ate food people had brought, cornbread and apple stack cake and something involving dried beans that Vivienne could not identify but ate 2 servings of. A teenager in the back, who had come with her grandmother, and looked initially like she would rather be anywhere else, picked up a shuttle from the loom Vivienne had set up in the corner and asked, in a voice carefully calibrated, to suggest she didn't really care about the answer, how it worked. Vivienne showed her. Within 20 minutes the girl was running the shuttle back and forth, with a focused expression that looked nothing like the expression of someone who would rather be somewhere else. Vivienne stood at the door of the building in the May light, with Cecile's old notebook in her hand. She had been keeping her own record, a log of women who came, and what they had learned and what they had done with it, because it seemed right to keep the record, and she understood something she could not have understood a year ago. Her Aunt Cecile had brought her to Calderbend as a girl, to these hills, to this particular hollow. Cecile had been a practical woman who believed in knowing things with your hands, who had taught Vivienne to take a blood pressure reading with a manual cuff when Vivienne was 12, who had said, "You learn with your hands, so your hands know what to do when your head is scared." Vivienne had become a nurse, in part because of Cecile. She had stopped being a nurse because of Dennis. She was a nurse again. She was in Calderbend again. Later she looked it up. Cecile's mother, Vivienne's great-aunt, had been in Harlan County in the 1930s. She might have been in this cooperative. Vivienne could not confirm it from the ledger because great-aunt Mabel had married young and changed her last name twice, and the trail was unclear. But she was from this hollow. She had the right hands. Vivienne thought, maybe it doesn't matter whether the line is direct. Maybe the line runs through the hills themselves, through the stone walls of this building, through the long work table that has held the work of hundreds of hands. Maybe kindness doesn't only travel through blood. Maybe it travels through place, through the decision to stay, through the willingness to sit down at a table that someone else built and do the same work in a new hour. Octavia Price had sealed a letter under a stone floor in 1968 and addressed it to whoever finds this. She had not known Vivienne's name. Vivienne had not known Octavia's name until she was 54 years old with $2,847 in her account and her life in pieces. But Octavia had written, "I know someone will come because things that matter have a way of being found." Vivienne Owens had been found. She had not remarried. She had not needed to. She lived in Cecile's white clapboard house and walked to the cooperative every morning the way Octavia had walked to this building, up the gravel path through the white oak and the sycamore, and she kept the record and taught and practiced medicine, and stayed. The cooperative's ledger, the one Vivienne herself kept, had grown to 3 volumes by the time this story came to us. There is a line painted now above the door of the Calderbend Women's Cooperative in the same upright script as Octavia Price's handwriting, because Vivienne had looked at the letter long enough that she could approximate it. Whatever we have planted here is already growing. If this story moved you, we hope you'll subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. And we want to ask you something in the comments. Was there a woman in your life, a teacher, an aunt, a neighbor, someone who showed you what your hands could do? Tell us her name. We believe she deserves to be spoken out loud wherever she is. See you in the next one.